going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Coming days, we are going to be traveling through the 24 counties, and we're going to meet with the local community leaders, and we're going to talk about federal issues, and we're going to address the local needs and begin the work. And I'm going to work hard to represent the citizens of the 4th District of Kentucky.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. That was part of Geoff Davis's election night speech almost 2 months ago now. This coming week, Geoff Davis will complete his trip to Washington and be sworn in as the representative for the Kentucky 4th Congressional District that stretches through northern Kentucky from east of Maysville to the eastern suburbs of Louisville, a huge district. I am joined this morning by Congressman-elect Geoff Davis, who, along with 434 other members of the United States House of Representatives, will be sworn into office this coming Tuesday, January the 4th. Geoff, welcome to Newsmakers.
Great to be here, Dan.
Welcome back. And this has been this time between election and being sworn in is an interesting time. And you said in your speech on election night you'd be visiting with people in those 24 districts, 24 counties. What have you been doing in that respect over these past 2 months?
Well, true to our promise, actually, our transition began about 7 o'clock in the morning the day after the election, cleaning up the campaign and simultaneously beginning our transition efforts. We've been traveling the district, meeting with economic development officials, local officials, community leaders, wanting to clearly line out our priorities from a federal perspective for the next 2 years.
Now, do people who are, say, local mayors, local county officials, judge executives, do they relate to you differently? Do you hear something different once you're elected versus while you're a candidate?
Well, certainly we've been able to establish some new relationships, particularly out in the eastern part of the district that we didn't have before. But the one thing I would say is the issues are consistent, and they have been throughout the entire campaign. What we hear is simply more detail about the same issues with much more of a local flavor, especially when we're dealing in the municipalities with county officials, with the mayors, especially the small towns.
What would you say, what are some of those things that have been brought to your attention as you go to Washington you think really you do need to pay some attention to?
Well, when we come apart from the national issues and really look at a local level, I am a big believer that as taxpayers have to send their hard-earned dollars to Washington, where we can get a return on that back in the district is very important. I think we have serious infrastructure needs that will lay a foundation for growth in the long term and also create jobs. And many of these,
for example, what would that be?
Well, the largest issue that we're facing in the northern Kentucky-Cincinnati region right now is the replacement of the Brent Spence Bridge, which is a massive project. I've already been involved in the regional development meetings with the chambers, with OKI, with local political leaders. But we also have a variety of smaller projects ranging from the I-70 or I-471 corridor study. We have traffic issues to continue to fuel economic growth along the riverfront that really affects both sides of the river and is a safety issue. And bread and butter issues dealing with water and sewer funding, working with rural communities for improving local access.
These are usually not the glitzy issues that make the 30-second commercials during the campaign, but these are the things that congressmen really have to spend a lot of time on.
Absolutely, and to serve the people effectively, there's I think a great mechanism where government can add value to people's lives by giving them more control, more access in their communities, and really I want to do that to help create jobs and ultimately create more taxpayers.
So you're not opposed to bringing federal dollars back to the district here?
As long as they are for value-adding projects that will create jobs and ultimately more taxpayers, I think that's the solution. Getting people to work, especially in higher-paying jobs, it would be an investment that would dramatically pay off. And I think we've seen that with what Gene Snyder did, with much of the work that he was often made fun of in the media, has laid a foundation for great strides in growth. Jim Bunning is the congressman who took over after him, saw that same kind of fruit from his efforts, and I want to work with the tri-state delegation very closely on targeted projects that will not be a waste of taxpayers' dollars, but will create more taxpayers and ultimately benefit our region. One
of the things that every congressman-elect has to do is put together a staff, put together multiple offices, give people a sense of what the operation looks like. You know, when they go into the poll on election day, they're voting for you, but it's not just you. It's really a staff that you have to put together. What have you had to do in these last 2 months on that?
Well, we have to, or decided to open 3 offices. We'll certainly have our Washington office in the Longworth House office building, but for in-district operations, we'll have an operation in northern Kentucky off of Buttermilk
and we're going to give the
County.
address and telephone number for that later.
And another one in the Ashland area. And we're hiring a staff of approximately 18 that'll be divided between the district and Washington, D.C. The great advantage that we have is our entire legislative staff all has in-district experience, including one legislative assistant who is intimately familiar with the campaign and was a member of the UK rugby team, which may come in handy in working the halls of Congress on local projects.
Yeah, and somewhat times looked like that, yeah. Now, in terms of, we talked a little bit about local issues bubbling up from the bottom, things that are a concern of the district that aren't necessarily partisan, they're just a matter of infrastructure and that sort of thing. What about on the national level? What, as you go into this Congress, what do you imagine are the priorities, not just that you have, but you think the priorities of the Republican Party, which is the majority party, is going to push forward in this next Congress?
There's a lot of discussion on Social Security reform. I think that's going to be a debate, though, that will continue for some time. In terms of issues that will directly affect us here that I'm personally committed to be involved in, there's going to be a discussion on tax simplification, making the tax cuts permanent to allow people to keep more of what they earn. We need an energy bill, desperately. There's tremendous economic advantage to the entire Ohio Valley with the passage of a comprehensive energy bill that will create more jobs and give us a clean environment.
Let's back up a little bit because we've just gone over 3 huge areas. Social Security. Do you favor private accounts for people, younger people particularly?
Well, we already have private accounts. That's the IRAs, 401ks.
Yeah, but it's part of the Social Security program.
Well, I'm on the record repeatedly opposing privatization, and I still, I really believe the answer is to break this into 2 separate aspects. You know, when we get a flat tire in our car, we don't trade the car in, we fix the tire. And I think there are challenges that the Social Security Administration faces that need to be addressed. The key to strengthening Social Security is to improve the internal process and have a strong economy to fund it into the future. I also think it's important, though, to have economic incentives to spur savings for the long term. And we can do that by
spur savings beyond the Social Security program.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that it's a very straightforward process to improve retirement savings opportunities, tax-exempt savings opportunities for young people to encourage them to save for the long term.
You also mentioned tax simplification. Now, there's a variety of things out there. Sometimes it is just let's simplify the forms. Sometimes it's let's dump the income tax as we know it and go to a value-added tax, a VAT. Where do you stand on how much we have to do with the tax system? Not the height of taxes, not the level of taxes, but the system itself.
At a macro level, you're going to see a debate on a wide variety of tax alternatives. I look from as a business professional, taxes that are onerous, cumbersome, often contradictory. We find that consumers pick up all the time. For example, there's a Byzantine system of fuel taxes between the states, which has a tremendous impact on retail prices and local job creation that adversely affects the transportation industry. I believe that needs to be simplified. We need to simplify how an individual processes their own return to reduce that overall hidden cost to our economy. And I think there are a variety of regulatory fees that are really hidden taxes that need to be addressed in this process as well.
You know, I have to tell you, I've had congressional candidates, I've had congressmen come on. They're all in favor of tax simplification. Everybody's in favor of tax simplification. But I can't say that I've seen much difference myself in terms when I have to fill out my taxes, you know, every January, February. I haven't noticed much improvement over the years. I mean, is there really going to be is this just talk, or is there going to be something that really changes?
There is a committed group of fiscal conservatives that actually crosses party lines in a number of areas that desires true simplification, less handling, a more simplified and fair regulatory structure. And I believe in the long run, what that will do is put more money back into the economy.
You mentioned being a fiscal conservative. How deeply are you worried about the deficit we're running at the moment? Because I find it ironic that for years the Republicans always accused the Democrats of allowing this deficit budget to build up, and now we're in just the opposite situation. How worried are you about this, and what are you willing to do about it?
Well, I think we have to cut the deficit and balance the budget.
And how? How do we do
critical.
that? Do we raise taxes?
We create more taxpayers is the most important thing. Raising taxes typically has a regressive effect. And to me, what we need to do is focus on policies that will promote small business growth, job creation, create more taxpayers, and ultimately increase government revenues from that standpoint. I think also every federal program needs to have a means test. No dollars should be spent unless there's going to be a clear return to the country and to the taxpayers.
Is there a specific program that you feel you're going there and you say, I want to go after this program, I don't believe it ought to exist?
I believe that what we need to do is look at each agency, particularly the EPA has overstepped its statutory bounds in certain areas. We have regulations that are not based on sound science.
For example?
Small businesses, a dry cleaner, is held effectively to the same standards for MSDS compliance as an oil refinery is. The remediation costs are simply impractical when somebody has to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to remove a few teaspoons of oil from the ground. To me lacks common sense completely. What we need are regulations that are scalable and dictate an end state that unleash entrepreneurial spirit and creativity that will get low-cost solutions to our problems, the challenges that we face. The benefit is that we get a clean environment, we save money, and we create more jobs in the long run. And that translates over into our long-term energy needs as well.
And we're almost out of time here, but it sounds like a real theme here for you is promotion of small business. Entrepreneurship, and that grows out of your own experience, as I understand it.
Absolutely.
But that is, could I say that is going to be a theme of what you're doing in the next 2 years?
I'm very committed to helping the small business community grow.
Okay. Well, I hope you have an opportunity to come back over the next couple of years and keep us up to date with what you're doing, and thank you for being here, and good luck. If people want to get in touch with you, your local Northern Kentucky office is at 277 Buttermilk Pike, which is zip code 41017, and the telephone number there is 859-426-0080. And I'll bet a lot of people are going to find that number and call you about a whole bunch of strange things.
We're looking forward to helping them.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff, and good luck.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Stay tuned. After the break, I'll be joined by a Cincinnatian who recently spent 3 weeks in Iran, an opportunity few Americans have had since 1979. Thank you. She's actually smiling. 25 years ago today, the United States was 2 months into the 444-day Iranian hostage crisis. Since then, there has been very few opportunities for contact between our two nations. Welcome back. Since 1979, the United States and Iran have had few official state-to-state contacts. In fact, at the beginning of his presidency, George W. Bush singled out Iran, along with Iraq and North Korea, as part of the axis of evil. In the darkest days of the Cold War, Americans and Soviets learned that the value of people-to-people contacts that flew below the official diplomatic radar screen. Programs like Sister Cities. Little opportunity for that, however, has existed with Iran since the hostage crisis. Last summer, however, one young Cincinnatian was able to travel to Iran for 3 weeks. I am joined now by Tom Wyler, who is a graduate student at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and pursuing a master's degree in international law and Islamic civilization. Tom, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And it sounds like a really interesting major and a really interesting focus. This opportunity you had to study, to go to Iran for 3 weeks, who set this up? How official was this?
Well, it was official in the sense that it was sponsored by the university, and it got Tufts University approval. There was an Iranian student, actually 2 Iranian students at Tufts. One was a graduate student and one was an undergraduate student who still have family over there. And they worked hard for about a year to put this together. And there was a selection process that we went through and things of that nature. And so it did have official university sponsor, and we had to get it cleared, through various governmental channels. The Iranian government had to approve it as well, and that's sort of the hardest part of the whole deal, is getting approval from them. And it was really the first trip of its type since the Iranian Revolution.
And what were you focused on? First off, how many people were in the group?
I guess there were a total, including the people that set it up and the people who went with us. There was one girl's father went. I guess there were 10 of us, I believe. I think it was 10.
And what was the focus? What were you trying to study while you were there those 3 weeks?
Well, we all had our individual research topics. I'm also going to law school, so my area of interest being international law, I was focused on studying Sharia, which is Islamic law. So that was sort of what I was personally focusing on. A good friend of mine who's in graduate school with me was focusing on international medicine, and he did some work on HIV/AIDS when he was over there. So we all had our individual research topics, but then in addition to that, we all would sort of talk to as many people as we could in our various opportunities that we had about the future of U.S.-Iranian relations, where they saw it going, where we saw it going, if there was any future there.
How free were you to interact with ordinary Iranians? How did you have a sense that you were being watched, minded? How did that work?
Well, there's no question in my mind that we were being watched, in a sense. We sort of, everywhere we went, we would try and figure it out, and we sort of drew the conclusion that we were being watched by 2 different groups. One was there to watch us in sort of the traditional sense, and one was also there to protect us, I think. And it's hard to identify it, but strange things happened at various points. And so we were free to talk to people. I imagine that there were certain things that we did that were perhaps far enough out of line, which nobody was going to do. We had all spent time studying Iran, and we knew what was and was not acceptable. So that wasn't really an issue. But we were free to talk to people. But it really wasn't a problem. I don't think anybody ran into an opportunity where they were cut short.
How did you find Iranians? How do they right now think about the United States and the United States policy towards them and towards the Muslim world? What did you learn about that?
Well, it's an interesting thing, and it came up actually a surprising number of times. Many Iranians are simply wondering, and they ask us about this frequently, when are we basically going to take a right turn and head from Iraq into Iran? I was actually stunned to see how often people asked us, when is the United States going to invade Iran? So that's one thing, is that they are legitimately worried that we are going to invade Iran.
Are they worried? Is it because we're in Iraq now, or is it in combination because we're in Iraq and because President Bush has also declared them part of the axis of evil?
I think it is definitely a combination of the two. And they sort of have this strange relationship with the war in Iraq right now, because they hated Saddam Hussein. The Iran-Iraq War, which started shortly after the Iranian Revolution, over 1 million Iranians were killed. That's more than the Americans that were killed in World War I and World War II combined. So they have this very strange relationship. They are thrilled to see Saddam Hussein gone. But when very holy sites in the Muslim world, the Karbala, the shrines of Imam Hussein and Imam Ali, when they were attacked during the summer, a lot of people approached us about and asked about that and how we felt about American troops firing on these shrines. And so there were a lot of discussions about that, and they have a very strange relationship with the conflict over there. But it is definitely a combination of the two, the fact that we're both in Iraq currently and that we have identified Iran as part of the axis of evil.
Was it possible to talk to people meaningfully about their attitude about their country's development of a nuclear capability, which we are very concerned about at the moment? Is that something that people there could talk? Are they aware of it? What do they think of it? Do they think of it as a military thing? Do they think of? How do they explain that?
Well, they are not aware of it in the same sense that we are, or at least that we think we are. Their media is very tightly controlled, and they have access to the internet. In sort of a limited fashion. I mean, it is certainly not as pervasive as it is obviously in this country. But no, I mean that frankly that is not something that we could talk about. And when it came up, we were able to speak about it in more general terms, in the sense that they questioned why it was anybody else's right to say what arms they could and could not have. You know, why was it the United States' place to question their use of nuclear weapons? But the specifics of it, no, the people that we met, not being government officials for the most part, really are not up to speed on the issue.
Your focus was on Sharia, on Muslim laws that functions in Iran, and I'm not sure, I mean, it's pictured in the American press, both print and electronic, and it's usually seen as very harsh and sort of one-sided. And what is it what's your insight into this? I don't even know what the operative questions were that you were pursuing,
Sure.
but how can you help Americans understand that?
Well, one thing that I found out about it that was sort of interesting is it's fundamental to the way that their society is run. And so it doesn't operate in the same sense that our laws do. It's more of a way of life. And I found it to be very, very difficult to engage people on it because they don't conceptualize it in terms of rules. It's simply the way that their daily life exists, is that they live by Sharia. Whether it goes from the head covering, which they call hijab, or just the way that women dress, or, the treatment of women in general. It's the way they live their lives. So yes, at times it can be harsh, no question about it. And we didn't really see that. I've studied it more than we were able to see it. But it was interesting to me, I'd say for the most part, to see that they don't really think about it in terms of laws. It's simply the way
So it's
they
not
exist.
a matter of electing a new government who will
Correct.
change the laws.
Correct.
A new government would also embrace
Correct.
this way of life. Is that what we're saying?
Well,
here?
a new government, the way that the Iranian system is set up, it's obviously very different than ours, and I think many would argue, and I would probably fall into this group, that it's not a true democracy. They have the ability, they have elections, they have the ability to elect a government. But if the government were to pass laws that were not in line with Sharia, they have something called the Council of Guardians, which is not an elected body, and it oversees their elected officials. And if their elected officials were to pass laws that weren't in line with Sharia, they'd be thrown out along with elected officials. So yeah, it's something that.
So what does that
controls
mean
everything.
for the position of women in that society going into the future in terms of access to education, in terms of access to professions, in terms of access to elected positions?
Well, they do have some access to education. We met with students who were studying, in a similar way to, sort of international relations students in Iran. And some of them were women. Actually, interestingly, some of the most impressive were women. But the treatment of women there is something that is striking. In the first moment that we left the airport, we pulled up alongside a bus. And the bus, it's segregated. The men sit in the front and the women sit in the back, and it is remarkable. They don't even have a glass ceiling there. They have something more akin to a glass cellar. So there really is not an opportunity for career advancement. Educational opportunities are there, but limited.
Did the women that you were able to meet and talk to, are they chafing under this? Are they angry about this? Do they want to try to find a way to change that?
Well, I'm not sure I would use the word angry. They're definitely chafing under it. Two of the women that we met in particular, and I found to be remarkable, really very, very interesting, about 27, 28 years old. And one of them absolutely refused to get married. She was trying very hard to get her PhD, but she would have to leave Iran to do that. And she wouldn't get married, and that prevented her younger sisters from getting married. But she wouldn't do it. She refused to yield to that family pressure. So, yeah, they chafe under it. I'm not sure angry is the word that I would use. They are very respectful of their system, in a sense, certainly of their religion. But, yeah, there is a lot of frustration. Clearly, there's a lot of frustration among women, at least among women who have the opportunity to have some sort of education about the situation they face. Yes.
And we've got less than a minute here. In Iran, what was the one sort of big image, surprise, thing that you will probably stay with you that maybe you didn't understand before you went?
The contradictions of that society. The fact that, if you study Iran, you hear a lot about how people on the ground in Iran at the moment are angry with their government. And they are, and it's a religious government. But yet they all take their religion very seriously. I shouldn't say they all, but most of them, the vast majority, take it seriously. The women are very frustrated with their position, yet they're very respectful of their religion and their families. So the contradictions in that society are fascinating. And I think on this trip, we only sort of scratched the surface of what
Which
we can learn
is
about.
only America is beginning to scratch the surface. So it's a great opportunity you had. I'm glad we met each other and had an opportunity for you to come on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work. By the way, I want to apologize to Congressman Geoff Davis. I misspelled his name in the first part. That's totally my fault. I can't spell it all. So anyway, thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. We begin next week with Congressman Rob Portman. So be sure to tune in and have a good week.